Well, the uprising in Syria has intensified with the assassination of a military leader in Damascus, further shelling in Homs and a double explosion in Aleppo. The situation is threatening to become an international crisis. So what should the West and particularly the United States do about it? I'm joined by the American journalist Robin B. Wright, who's just written a book on the uprisings in the Middle East called Rock the Kasbah, Rage and Rebellion Across the Islamic World. She joins me now from Washington. Good to see you, Robin Wright. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. Well, Rage and Rebellion, that was just the beginning. It seems that we're looking at least another year of that.
Oh, absolutely. And I think actually the next generation we're going to see probably more turmoil than we have in the past decade. This is a pivotal moment of transition, and it is likely to be tumultuous both in terms of the kind of big political questions and defining a new order, and also the horrendous economic problems that all of these countries face. But of course, Syria being the example of the insecurity, instability, and the military challenges that these countries are facing as well.
I mean, there's absolutely no real guidance, internal or external, in Syria in what direction it should go, what direction it's trying to go in. So we could be looking at a fight for freedom, we could be looking at a fight for democracy, we could be looking at civil war, or even just plain and simple a Sunni rebellion.
Andrew, that's exactly right. I think one of the problems is that you have three different components of the Syrian opposition now. You have the Syrian National Council, which is a group of predominantly exiles, including the Muslim Brotherhood, some secular and liberal groups, a wide range. Then you have the internal forces, the local coordinating committees, who are keeping track of what's going on inside the country, trying to organize people in protests. And the third force is the Free Syrian Army, this group of defectors estimated to number anywhere from 10 to 17,000. And the problem is that the three different opposition groups are not coordinating. There's not one plan, one alternative. And as a result, we don't know what's going to happen next and whether there is going to be a greater sense of order and organization, or whether it's going to go into a free fall.
And that's the problem, because the international public imagination at the moment seems obsessed with the idea that things will get better for Syrians if President Assad is thrown out of power. But actually, there's not very much evidence to suggest that that's the way it'll go.
Not necessarily, and today is the one-year anniversary since the ouster of President Mubarak in Egypt, and we see today that in some ways there's greater instability than there was a year ago. There are tremendous clashes between those who are protesting against the dregs of the old regime, the military council that has been in control and that doesn't look all that willing to hand over power in terms of absolute terms, maybe on paper, but not in reality. And as a result, you're finding greater, again, economic insecurity, a greater sense of political tensions in the country than even during Mubarak's last days.
I mean, what's interesting as well is that privately, thinking about the countries that are, in a way, supporting Syria, like Russia and perhaps China, if you look at how they behaved at in New York, privately, diplomats are saying that a lot of the Russian diplomats were amenable to a lot of the suggestions knocking around the Security Council. It seems to be the Kremlin that has such a problem with giving any inch over the status quo in Damascus and Syria.
Andrew, you've really identified the key issue, and that is the repercussions for both Beijing and Moscow. These are countries that face their own restive populations. In Moscow, you've seen street demonstrations on the eve of critical elections when Vladimir Putin is running yet again for the presidency that could keep him in power until 2024. And in Beijing, you find people very concerned about the restive Muslim population in the western provinces, and they have a long memory in terms of Tiananmen Square and the fact that people power was the first real challenge to communist rule. So both countries look at Syria not just in terms of what happens in Damascus and does the Assad dynasty survive, but what happens in their own backyards.
So are you suggesting that really what Russia and perhaps even China are doing is looking at the central part of the globe, seeing what we've decided can be called people power tonight, spreading, and they're fearful that that could be bad news for them down the line?
Oh, I think absolutely, and this is something that's happening globally. Whether it's the Greeks getting out over what's happening on the austerity budget or the Occupy Wall Street movement, people power is a dynamic in the early 21st century. This scares virtually every government in the world.
Has America got a role to play in that, do you think?
Well, the United States has a very limited ability to do anything about Syria anyway. Clearly, it can raise the noise level and talk about how unacceptable this is in terms of standards in the 21st century. But in terms of political options, there aren't many. The one thing the United States and its Western allies can consider is perhaps humanitarian aid for medical supplies, foodstuffs, and so forth, to try to get into some of these besieged areas. But it's a lot harder than it sounds. But there aren't many other good alternatives. It'll take the local actors, people like the Prime Minister Erdogan in Turkey or the King of Saudi Arabia, the Muslim governments themselves to put the squeeze on Assad, I think, at this stage.
Okay, Robin Wright, thanks very much indeed for joining us, and good luck with your latest book. Thanks very much.
Thank you.